It was reported in the August 28th edition of The Observer that the weekly costs of producing Nitro are going to be well in excess of $100,000, but TNT is only going to pay WCW $38,000 a week for the show. So it's positioned to look like it's a money loser from the get-go. Do you have any sort of insight on production costs of Nitro, Tony, or doing a live show like this at that time?
No, but I'm sure the numbers that were out there are pretty darn close. It was more than $38,000 to produce a show. To produce a live show, and we brought this up earlier. How many people does it take?
Right.
And we're talking about.
Got to fly them in. I mean, there's the building, security.
Pyro probably cost $30,000.
Right.
Security, all that stuff. So if those numbers are correct, then we were losing money on that. But of actual figure, I don't know. But north of $100,000 to me seems pretty legit, even for the first one.
Was there any pressure internally to push ad sales or create revenue in other ways to try to offset this loss for WCW?
Yeah, there was no question there was. We had a sales staff. There was a kid named Kid. He's older than I am, I think. Rob Garner, who was in sales, pushing for sales. And so we had a whole sales staff. And, yeah, there was plenty of pressure to offset the cost of this in other ways.
It's worth mentioning here that WCW was paying to air their syndicated shows prior to Nitro becoming a thing. So, for example, in New York alone, they're spending more than $600,000 a year to air that syndicated show, and they have a similar deal in LA and other markets. So if you add all of that up and you kind of scratch some of those, Nitro could become a lost leader of sorts, because in theory, more people will see Nitro, and you wouldn't need as much of this expense on the syndicated deals. How did you guys justify these big syndication deals? Did you think it was paying for itself from a pay-per-view standpoint, or did you have local sales teams in the market, or how did that work?
You have to go back in that era and I'm sure there are numbers to support it. For a longest time, New York City did not have cable, and a lot of people got their wrestling on the local channels. Of course, that has tremendously changed now. You're 22 years later. But I had often heard that you needed syndication in New York because of the lack of cable exposure. Do you know that to be the case? Have you read on that? Have you studied that? Do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure. It's not a business that I...
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think that's what's always thought. Paying $600,000 a year to me just blows my mind, because back in the old days, you did a barter.
Right.
And now if we're paying that, why are we paying that? Because if they don't have cable, they're not going to watch the pay-per-views. And how many times do we run a house show in New York? We never can run Madison Square Garden. I'm just taking New York as an example.
Sure.
We can only run the Nassau Coliseum. Is it worth $600,000 a year to bring in a house show maybe twice a year?
Yeah, let's scrap that $12,000 a week investment. I mean, it's certainly not going to pay itself off, and instead double down on Nitro. So
yeah, right.
Just by restructuring the money that's already allotted for television, you can come out ahead.